This episode of Eat the Rules is brought to you by You on Fire. You on Fire is the online group coaching program that I run that gives you a step-by-step way of building up your self-worth beyond your appearance. With personalized coaching from me, incredible community support, and lifetime access to the program so that you can get free from body shame and live life on your own terms. Get details on what's included and sign up for the next cycle at summerinanen.com/you on fire. I'd love to have you in that group. This is Eat the Rules, a podcast about body image, self-worth, anti-dieting, and intersectional feminism. I am your host, Summer Inanen, a professionally trained coach specializing in body image, self-worth, and confidence, and the best-selling author of Body Image Remix. If you're ready to break free of societal standards and stop living behind the number on your scale, then you have come to the right place. Welcome to the show. This is episode 308, and I'm joined by Shana Spence, who has been on the show before. She's a registered dietitian nutritionist and author of the new book, Live Nourished, Make Peace with Food, Banish Body Shame, and Reclaim Joy. We're talking about why the BMI is bullshit, whether processed foods are really bad for us, and her perspective that all foods fit. You can find the links mentioned at summerinanen.com/308. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to Mama Anderegg, who left this review. Wow, I found this podcast just when I needed it the most. I struggle daily with body image issues and feeling inadequate because of my physical appearance. Every single episode gets me 1 inch closer to body acceptance, and I'm so thankful I found this podcast. Summer, you are amazing. Keep standing up for us women who are struggling to stand up for ourselves. You're making an impact. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that review. So very generous and kind of you. You can leave a review by going to Apple Podcasts, search for Eat the Rules, click ratings and reviews, and click to leave a review. If you really want to support the show, I would love you to head to ko-fi.com/summerinanen. That's ko-fi.com/summerinanen. That link will always be in the information for the episode. So, you know, when you're listening to an episode on your phone and you hit episode info and it describes the episode, that link will always be in there. So you can check it out there. That's where you can make a monthly contribution to the podcast to keep it on the air for another season. For as little as $5 a month, you can keep the show on the air, and you'll also get access to my mini course, Conquering Negative Body Talk. So if this podcast has made a difference in your life, I would really appreciate you doing that. You can also get free resources at my website, including the free 10-day Body Confidence Makeover, as well as my body image coaching roadmap for professionals. And you can find all of that stuff at thebodyimagecoach.com. Super excited to have Shana back on the show again, talking about her new book, Live Nourished, which is another amazing resource to add to your repertoire. Shana is a registered dietitian nutritionist based in Brooklyn, New York. She currently works in public health for the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, doing community nutrition lessons, and also owns her own company, the Nutrition Tea. She describes herself as an all foods fit dietitian and creates a platform for open discussion on nutrition and wellness topics that are inclusive, non-diet, and weight neutral, all with an intersectionality of social justice. Her new book, Live Nourished, Make Peace with Food, Banish Body Shame, and Reclaim Joy, is out now. Let's get started with the show. Hi, Shana. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I'm super excited to have you here and talk all about your new book and all the work that you do as a dietitian. I know you've been on the show before, and we kind of talked about just like how you got into this work and all that stuff. But like, what prompted you to write a book? What made you want to put all that effort into writing a book?
Yeah, definitely. I think that there was sort of a narrative that was missing within nutrition books in general, but definitely the non-diet space. I think that it's so important to talk about a healthy relationship with food and how to get to that point. But I think that sometimes the narrative of access and also different demographics was missing. And that was a whole reason for me wanting to sort of write from that perspective. In my social media posts and my articles, I talk a lot about the social determinants of health and all those different types of intersections when we're talking about nutrition. So I thought it was just important to have a book that we could also read, read about, all that information. So I was really excited to write about it.
Yeah. And to give it to all the people that constantly probably come into your comment section and be like, but what about this? And you're telling people to only eat processed foods and all that stuff.
Exactly. Here's my book and you can now read about it.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things, like you talked about, okay, you are providing more of an intersectional lens on nutrition and wellness, so to speak. But one of the things you mentioned in your book is you say like most health professionals, school taught me all about how to stigmatize. What do you mean by what was your experience? Like, what do you mean by that? Because I feel like I maybe had sort of a similar experience as to you.
For sure. Yeah. I always say, I feel like I got my degree in diet culture and, we have the classes of bias and like fat phobia, like all of those things, because in the health field, we're given textbooks and we're told, okay, we have to memorize all of these numbers. And some of those numbers include, how folks in larger bodies are being looked upon as far as their health, and there's sort of a bias when we think about it, right? We're taught, okay, if they're larger, they must be unhealthy. I mean, same thing can be said about different demographics. If we look at different races or, sexual orientations, gender, we're given bias. I remember this one textbook. My friend went to nursing school. And I didn't have this textbook, but I remember her showing it to me, how in the book there was different races and there was like these stigmas. This was like a textbook for health professionals, okay? And it was, how African Americans or Blacks can feel more pain, or how like Latinos can feel like a lot of their trauma is due to like religious reasons. Okay. Like all of these stigmas and biases that we learn in school and then we take with us in the clinical fields, or I should say the health field. So quite honestly, it takes a bit of undoing to learn that. And, there's so many biases. And, I think it's uncomfortable to realize that we all have them. And it's just our job to sort of undo them, realize we have them and try to work backwards, because I'd be lying if I said that I didn't have any. I mean, I went to school for this, so I learned it from somewhere, so it's unfortunate, but yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I had a similar experience in when I went to nutrition school. It was like a holistic nutrition, so different than dietetics, but same kind of thing is just and I don't know about yours. I'm hoping yours was better, but not once were we taught how to screen for eating disorders, or disordered behaviors. Yeah. Which is like what?
Exactly.
How is that
so problematic? Yeah, so problematic. I think that it was I don't even think it was a chapter in a textbook, or maybe we skipped over that chapter, because everything I learned about eating disorders was partly in my internship, but on my own, and which is a problem. They're very prevalent. So that's a huge problem, unfortunately. Ugh, yeah.
Especially when your job is to help people eat, to figure out food or whatever, and you're not learning how to screen for those. And I think that's really important for people listening to understand that if they have had these experiences before where they've been, stigmatized by someone in the health profession, it's because oftentimes A, they're not getting any training on bias, and B, they might not even have any training on how to screen for eating disorders.
It's true. Because when you think about it, I mean, honestly, now that you brought that up, I'm really trying to remember any sort of course I had in school. And I can't think of any. Like, I really don't think we we covered that in school. Everything was on my own. Yeah. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I know. And honestly, like my mind's just sort of processing it as I'm talking to you as well. Cause I'm like, wow, how did we not learn that? Like we're going out and our job is to help people with their food.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
What?
Exactly.
It's dangerous. So yeah, to your point, like obviously you've done a lot of work to undo any of that bias and really take that intersectional lens. And so one of the things that you talk about quite often is like sort of getting rid of the BMI or changing the way we talk about health, but really divesting that from the BMI. So we've talked about the BMI in this podcast, like probably 2 or 3 years ago, but I feel like it's worth bringing up again because oftentimes people forget or they don't go back and listen to episodes from that long ago. Mm-hmm. So can you just talk a little bit about the BMI and why it's such an unreliable health measure?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when we think about how or like where so much of our focus is now on health, like where it stemmed from, because the founder, if we go way back in time, right, like the founder of BMI was this mathematician, this astronomer, and he was also very much into eugenics. And I think that sometimes when we're talking about looking at these cutoff, I guess, numbers, right? When we're looking at someone's, unfortunately, I'm going to use the O words here, like overweight, obese, when we're looking at those things from the BMI, we have to remember that it was founded by someone whose goal was to formulate the perfect man. And I'm not making that term up. Like that was literally what he was trying to do. He was trying to find the ideal measurements for the perfect man. And the perfect man, in his opinion, this is not mine, in his opinion, was thin, and white. And, women were not included. People with disabilities were not included. Of course, people of color were definitely not included. So now we're using this same formula. Now it's 2024. And so we have to think to ourselves, maybe we should be relooking at some things here, to be using this formula. And even though you're going to have people who will say, well, how else will we determine health? I mean, honestly, there are so many problematic things wrong with that statement, because when we're using that as an excuse, well, I want to see how healthy someone is. It's really saying, well, I don't care that it's being used to discriminate. I don't care that it's being used in ways that it shouldn't be. I just, we just need to concentrate on health. And it's like, we can do so many other things than, then follow this BMI system, because BMI is used to discriminate. A lot of insurance companies use it to discriminate, as well as even we just talked about eating disorders. Many times certain eating disorder clinics have cutoffs as far as what your BMI is in order to seek treatment. So all of these things are problematic. And so I know I'm going on a rampage here because I have so many thoughts on it, but it's just, it's when you think about what it was formulated for and how we're still using it, I think it's a problem. I'll just say that.
Yeah, totally. 100%. And so like what, and I don't know if you have this answer, but I guess like what for as someone who's listening, who's like, okay, and so how do I measure health?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. So how would you answer that?
Yeah, I think that there's so many things we can do. First of all, we can actually look at the individual as a person rather than just looking at numbers, right? Like oftentimes when you go to the doctor, sometimes, and this is not a dig at doctors, okay, at all, but sometimes they're just looking at, okay, they take your height, they take your weight, and they formulate the BMI, and then they just tell you, okay, like try to be healthier. But they don't really ask you about yourself. They don't ask if you're eating. They don't ask what your stress level is. They don't ask if you're sleeping. All of these things, which are actual health behaviors. So if we're looking at health, my suggestion is to always think about, well, what is a person's lifestyle? What are they doing? What are they actually doing? Because oftentimes, or many times, I should say, bodies aren't business cards, right? Like we're looking at someone in a larger body and just assuming that they're not eating a healthful diet or nutrient dense foods, and that's not true. Or we're assuming that just because someone is thin, that they are eating these foods, and that might not be true. So actually looking at what this person is doing versus just looking at their body. And I think that's the problem when we're thinking about health in general. We're looking at what someone looks like instead of what someone is actually doing, like the actual health behaviors. So I think that's a major distinction.
Yeah. And that's where the bias comes in, right? Because if even just like subconsciously, if you've been conditioned, which we all have, we've all been brainwashed to think, okay, health equals weight, then like that is going on, whether you kind of are aware of that or not, for most people, unless they've like really worked hard to kind of undo that bias and bring that awareness forward for themselves. And I think that's the difficult part for people. And that's why so many people have such horrible experiences going to the doctor or afraid to even go to the doctor, because
exactly,
they're just immediately, the assumptions are just immediately made about them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
So along that line, like I think that we make a lot of assumptions about processed foods, you know, and one of the things that you talk about quite a bit, like on your social media as well as in the book, is that processed foods, like convenience foods, like they can play a role in our life. They're not this like evil thing. So I want to talk to you a little bit about processed foods, but first, what is a processed food? Like I know there's different I believe there's you had different classifications that you listed out in your book and you described them. Do you mind just like kind of speaking to that a bit so people understand like what do you define as a processed food?
Yeah, I think that sometimes we just say the word processed and it sounds very scary because it sounds like something that came out of a machine. And sometimes it has, you know, but that doesn't mean that it's scary. Nor are all processed foods the same. So most of the time when we're talking about different classifications, we're looking at something called the NOVA system. And yes, it has its, you know, some people are for it, some people are against NOVA, you know, and I get it, but that's what most of us use because we'll have minimally processed foods, right? Like say, if you are getting like apples at the grocery store, you know, those are still processed, right? Because they had to be transported from the farm to the grocery store. So those still require some processing in order to keep them fresh, right? Same thing with like a bag of carrots. Yes, they're fresh foods and, you know, these foods are fine, but these are still processed, right? There's still some processing that is involved. And we also have, of course, the ultra processed foods that many of us think of, which are, you know, potato chips, soda, you know, those are definitely ultra processed foods. But what we have to remember is in the definition, ultra processed is really just foods that don't have their same kind of look in layman's terms, right? The same sort of look or even ingredients as their original state. So what that means is a food that's been broken down and maybe something has been added to it. And that sounds scary, but it shouldn't be, right? Because if we think of something like, say, if you're in a hospital, you know, unfortunately, we sometimes require some supplemental nutrition. If you go into a nursing home, right, sometimes the only thing that some folks might be able to eat or to consume are those like supplemental drinks, right? Like Ensure, Glucerna, I'm trying to think of all of them, Boost, right? Those are all ultra processed, you know, but they're still good for those folks, right? Because we want them to have something. Ultra processed foods might also be if you're a vegan and you want some sort of meat alternative, you're going to consume like, what is the name of that brand? Oh, Beyond Meat, I think, or like Impossible, those types of brands. Those are ultra processed, but you know, and there's a lot of controversy about those as well. However, they're still lower in like saturated fat. They still have the vitamins and minerals that mimic meat. So that would be good for a vegan or a vegetarian or, you know, whoever wants to consume them. So I think sometimes my goal is not to have people just scared of the word processed, but actually looking at the food in front of them. You know, just because it's ultra processed doesn't mean it has the same nutritional value as bag of chips. Like a bag of chips and, a Beyond Meat beef burger, whatever you want to call it, aren't the same foods. So I just want people to realize that there's a distinction here and it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where it gets confusing for people too, though, right? Is that like, because would those two things be like, those two things would be sort of classified together, right? And it's like people
as ultra
start
processed.
To think, yeah. But even the things that are like, for example, chips and
those aren't bad foods. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But those are the ones that people are saying like, okay, we need like tobacco style warnings on those. Like that's something that I've seen out there. Like, what do you think about that?
It's so weird to me because I think that, and here in the States, especially, I'm sure it's true of a few other countries, but we get compared to Europe quite a bit. And I just feel like when we're compared to other countries, like in Europe or wherever, it's like comparing apples to oranges, right? Because we're told we eat so many things like the first thing people think of are the chips or the soda, things like that. Every country has that, right? And so then it's like, well, why does America have more of these processed foods? And I always invite people to really dig deeper because we have to think why that is. You know what I mean? We're not, like I said, it's comparing apples to oranges because we don't have the same work-life balance that these other countries have. We don't have the same environments that these other countries have. And I think we fail to realize that, right? Like, I remember going to, it was Ecuador even. And I remember coming back in the afternoon from a really long hike and all I wanted was some ice cream. Right. And I remember walking through town, every single store was closed. And after a while, I was like, what is going, like being the dumb American I was just like, what is happening? Like, why aren't these stores open? And then finally someone said to me, it's lunchtime. Like, we're not open. Like, we're taking a break. And I'm like, oh my gosh, people do that. Right. And so my point is that here in the States, we don't do that. Like when you think of lunch, you think of half an hour and you're usually working at your desk. So you're going to go for something that is quick and convenient, right? So yes, you're going to go for that pre-bagged salad, right? Or that frozen meal because we don't get the luxury of getting, time off, and I had to stop myself when I remember walking around like, oh my gosh, this is actually what it's supposed to be like. And here I am like, wanting ice cream when these people are, on lunch. But that's my point is that, we often compare ourselves to countries like that. And we don't have the same work-life balance. We don't have the same structure, the same social connections or the same structure. So, we can't really compare ourselves. So yes, we have a lot of processed foods, but we also have to think of why we have a lot of processed foods here. And, like we mentioned before, chips aren't bad. Every country has them. If you walk around the grocery, like the first thing I do when I travel is walk around through the grocery stores. Every country has potato chips. Okay. Like, let's not act like it's a new thing here, but it's, that doesn't make it a bad food. It just makes it a fun celebratory food. I'm not saying to eat it 24/7. I'm just saying it doesn't make it a bad food. Okay, let's just clarify that too.
Yeah. I love that you brought up that comparison to other countries because I was actually in Europe a couple months ago for like a family thing. And so what I noticed is that they have their systems are so much better. Like whether it be like education, healthcare.
Oh, healthcare is like number one for me. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then even like transit. So being able to get somewhere a lot more efficiently, whether that be public transit or by like bike lanes, for example, and so, you think about, and then like the number of weeks of vacation, like all the things that you're mentioning.
Yeah.
And it's like, and the food's the same pretty much. Like where I went, it was the same. And so I think to your point, it's like, it's not the foods, it's capitalism. It's like,
for sure.
Healthcare. It's all of these other things.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
stress.
We don't, yeah, we don't look after and Canada's maybe a little better. We have healthcare, but like the systems aren't set up to like give people the best life and look after them really, you know? And so, yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because that was on my mind a couple months ago when I was there, and I was like, wow, like this is the difference. It's the lifestyle.
Yeah. And it is really nice. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Like it is really nice, but I just feel like well, this is another podcast topic. You know, we could have it if we tried, but you know, we don't right now. So we just have to kind of work with what we have.
Yeah. But yeah, I remember one place we went, it was the law that you had to have a green space every 300 meters. And so you think about, like, I know in the book you talk about food apartheid, like that being a real issue, that instead we blame processed foods instead of actually looking at some of these other issues that are actually a lot more important in terms of improving people's well-being.
Exactly.
So I want to talk about, because your book is called Live Nourished. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about that nourishment piece. You talk about intuitive eating in the book, and you talk about like taking useful pieces from it and maybe changing, and maybe some of the things that you would change. Like, what do you feel is the most, it's a two-part question, but like, what do you feel is the most useful? And then second to that, like, what would you change about it?
I think, one, intuitive eating is, of course, such a great concept. And I just noticed that sometimes when I was working with clients, counseling, I think that there was, because they were coming from a dieting place or dieting realm, it was confusing to see like the 10 principles of intuitive eating and not correlate that to a diet. So I think in their heads, it was confusing. And also, I don't think the concept of like recognizing trauma, and when I say trauma, I mean like poverty, food insecurity, I don't think that's talked about enough in intuitive eating. And I think, and I do acknowledge that they do mention it, Evelyn and Elise, they do mention it in the books, sort of. But in my personal view, I don't think it's talked about enough. And that can really affect how someone kind of feels their hunger cues, or even, their relationship to food. So I think that that's why, nothing's perfect, right? But I think those two concepts for sure, like food insecurity, poverty, sometimes are left out of the discussion.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of benefits to intuitive eating and the principles. And I think it always depends on the individual, right? And their own unique history and their own worldview and what they've experienced. And yeah, I think that a lot of intuitive eating comes through that like more privileged worldview. And so that's where those two things like can cause problems, right? If we're not taking the whole person and the systems into consideration. You're known for the like all foods fit, like it's in your bio.
Yes.
And I totally agree with you. What would you say to somebody who's like, okay, all foods fit, but like I'm not feeling good eating this way? Like what would sort of be your response or advice to them?
Yeah. And I think, so when I say all foods fit, I mean all foods can fit, but if you notice that, let's say a food does not agree with you, don't eat it. Like there is no way to make it fit. You might be intolerant to something. There might be an allergy there. I also like to include foods for medical reasons, but even that requires nuance, like folks who may have gotten diagnosed with diabetes. I think that they're sometimes being told to restrict foods they don't have to restrict. Like everything requires nuance. But when I say all foods fit, I really mean all foods have a place, whether that's potato chips, whether that's broccoli, a salad, all of these foods have a place in our eating pattern. And I think that, food doesn't just represent nutrients, it also represents joy. And I think that that's often the forgotten part of eating, is the joyful part. I truly think that sometimes we focus so much, which again, yes, nutrients are important, but we shouldn't have to constantly, whenever we're eating something, try to calculate the exact nutrients we're getting or the exact like macros we're getting. Like, it's okay to just say, I feel good eating this. This is working for me. You know, like it's okay. And, you know, not know the exact number, you know, of protein in it. Like, it's okay. You know, like, I think sometimes we're just so, you know, hyper focused on the nutrient aspect. We lose the joy in eating.
Yes, totally. 100%, 100%. I see that so much. Like, you're not a math equation. Like
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. One of the best things that I think you wrote was, I believe you posted it. It was really recent. Maybe it was like yesterday or today or something, but where you put like, there's a correlation between someone having a poor relationship with food and critiquing people on the internet.
I mean, it's true. Like, it's true. Because it sounds, I mean, I am trying to be funny, but also I'm also very serious because when you think about people who, you know, feel the need to give their unsolicited opinions on something and they do it in the most visceral, like nasty way, there is no way. There is something else going on because that's not, and I'm not making fun of like health issues or like mental health in any capacity. I mean this. There's something going on there that's deeper that they need to work on. And because that's not a normal reaction to something. And I'm being very serious. Like, you know, when you look at sometimes the lectures people are getting in the comment section when they're just living their life, that's not normal, you know, and they should really, you know, there's something going on. Oftentimes it's projecting, quite honestly. I think most of the time it's projecting.
Yeah. And I think it even like it can go so far as like, even if you just have a lot of internal judgments, whether you post them on the internet or not, because when you made that statement, I was like, oh, like I used to do that. I used to be like, but I would never post because I'm just not that type of person. But
right.
I'm not going to do that. But like just internally, like I would sort of, you know, like have those judgments because I had such a disordered relationship with food. And so now, you know, to your point, I think you also said like, if you have a good relationship with food and you just see food as neutral, like you don't do that. And you're so right. I'm like, I don't do that at all anymore. And that's really great. But
yeah. Like, I mean, I don't even think of, honestly, like, I don't even look at what someone's eating, you know, of course, like nutritionists, like we're thought of as like the food police, you know, unless someone like, don't get me wrong, if something looks good, I'm definitely looking at what that person is eating. But like, as far as the judgment, as far as like really looking at someone and being like, oh, you know, what is that? Why are they eating that? That like thought really doesn't come across in my head. I think it's, you know, because again, like it took me also years. I just want to be clear. Like I didn't wake up, you know, all of a sudden. Like it took years for me to, you know, it took a lot of inner work for me as well, because I also had a disordered relationship. I think many of us who are in this space did. That's why we're trying to help others now, you know, so I definitely used to, because of my own relationship with food. Of course, I looked at what other people were doing. But now there's a difference because I have a much healthier relationship. So, you know, there's something to be said there.
Yeah. And I think you and I, you know, I'm a little bit older than you, but we're similar, like we're around the same age. And because we grew up in the 90s, right? Like, well, not grew up, but like our impressionable years were through the 90s and early 2000s. And so I think that like really messed us up.
That was such a time. What a time. What a time to be alive.
How do you see, like, because for me, like when I think about that, and then I see what's happening now with like weight loss drugs and like skin filters and like all this stuff, like I am really afraid for like Generation Alpha. Is that what they're called? Like, does it sort of give you, and not clinically PTSD, but do you sort of have that same reaction where you're just like, oh my God, like this is the same shit that we went through and now it's happening again?
It's all coming back. It's all coming back. I swear, like the minute I saw like low rise jeans coming back, I was like, oh, here we go. Here we go. Because it's not just low rise jeans, like the fashion, it's what that symbolizes, right? Because, people are going to think I need my body to fit into that piece of clothing. I need my body to contort to that piece of clothing. And that's how this all begins. And so I was like, this is the turning point right here, because I think that we came from such a boost from the body positivity and I know the body positive movement still has its flaws, but we came from such a boost during honestly, the COVID, 2020, when we were all stuck inside and everyone was really, feeling themselves in a good way. But because of what was going on, I think that people were suddenly getting this sense of, pride and trying to get, to that place of really accepting themselves. And now that, things are semi back to normal, of course, there's still COVID happening, but, as far as us being outside and socializing again, there was a turn. And I'm noticing, now even with the Ozempic, right? People are popping that like it's a multivitamin. And I say that because you see these celebrities who don't, I don't, as far as need, if we're really talking need, I'm not like a fan of people just taking it, but you definitely see celebrities who are thin. Okay, why are you taking Ozempic? I'm seeing a lot of influencers, people joking about it on social media saying, oh, I think I'm going to just take the Ozempic, to get into my summer body, or, now the term is big back and all this other, stuff. So it's definitely taken a turn, which is concerning because we definitely went through that in the 90s and definitely the early 2000s. Oh my gosh, high school was, wow. But yeah, it's all coming back, all coming back.
Yeah. It's hard to kind of watch that again. And it's I'm so appreciative that I really don't it does not have any impact on me personally. And part of that is because I hold straight size privilege, but also because I've just done a lot of work around I don't need to look like that, but it's just interesting to talk to somebody else who kind of went through that same time frame. And
yes. Oh my gosh. Oh man.
But that's why everyone should buy your book, Live Nourished. And it's out now. It's amazing. I love it. It's such another great resource to have on your shelf. And I really appreciate that you do take an intersectional approach and look at the social issues that are also influenced that also influence health, to help people think broader about health and not just think about it through the vacuum of, food and exercise. I think that it's so necessary to have that understanding in terms of helping us in our own relationship with food, and also so that we can change our culture, so that when we know better, we can do better for others as well. So I'm so excited to have your book out in the world, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. So where can people find more of you, Shana?
Definitely. I mean, I'm on social media somewhat regularly. And my handle is the Nutrition Tea. And that handle is used for everything. So Instagram, I have a Facebook page. What else? TikTok is kind of here and there, but definitely Instagram. I also have a newsletter, which is called the Nutrition Tea. So you can definitely find me there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here today. As always, it's such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Rock on. Always a great time catching up with Shana. You can find her at the Nutrition Tea, as many of you probably know that already, and definitely check out her new book, Live Nourished, Make Peace with Food, Banish Body Shame, and Reclaim Joy. And if you want to hear an older episode of us, you can check out episode 181, How to Navigate Holiday Eating and Diet Talk. That's another gem for you. Thank you so much for listening today. You can find everything mentioned here at summerinnanen.com/308. Rock on. I'm Summer Innanen, and I want to thank you for listening today. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Summer Innanen. And if you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts, search Eat the Rules, and subscribe, rate, and review this show. I would be so grateful. Until next time, rock on.